So there's this massive alleged fraud in Gujarat that's all over the news, and the headlines are all screaming cybercrime. But what we're going to do right now is peel back the layers and find out that the real story isn't about broken code, it's about broken trust. We're about to see how the biggest failures are often not technological at all, but deeply, deeply human.
Okay, first things first, just look at this number, 2,500 crore rupees. Let that sink in for a second. I mean, this isn't some small-time scam, right? This is a colossal failure, and it really forces us to look way deeper than just the headlines.
And yeah, when you see a number that huge, your brain, and frankly the news, immediately jumps to one conclusion: cybercrime. You picture these super sophisticated hackers breaching these complex digital fortresses. It's the easy story, it's the one we all kind of understand, and let's be honest, it's a much simpler narrative. But here's the question that really flips the whole thing on its head. What if all those systems, the firewalls, the software, what if they were actually working just fine, like exactly as they were designed? What if the problem wasn't a glitch in the machine at all? And that brings us to the real heart of what we're digging into today. We're going to break down this myth of system failure and get to the much more uncomfortable human reality behind it all.
So this really gets at a fundamental misunderstanding most of us have about these things. We think, these massive frauds happen because the security, the castle walls, if you will, are just weak or old. But the reality? Oh, it's way more concerning. Most of the time, perfectly good controls are actively ignored, deliberately overridden, or just conveniently bypassed, and usually by people on the inside. Look, systems at this scale are built with all sorts of tripwires and alarms. They don't fail silently. The red flags, they pop up, they don't just disappear into thin air. No, they're seen, and then they're overlooked. This isn't a ghost in the machine. It's a decision made by a person. Okay, so how does this actually play out in the real world? I mean, what does it really look like when the human element causes security controls to fail this spectacularly? All right, this is where the theory hits the road. This is likely where a case like this one in Gujarat really starts. So, for example, you've got something called a maker-checker system. It's designed so two sets of eyes are on everything. But what happens? It just becomes a rubber stamping exercise. Then you've got these glaring red flags on transactions, and they're just getting pushed through anyway. It's just a complete underestimation of the risk that people might be working together, colluding, which turns a really important safety net into, just a formality. So let's be absolutely crystal clear here. Every single one of those failures, that's an active choice. It is a human decision, not some system glitch. It's someone, somewhere, deciding, you know what? I'm not going to ask that tough question. I'm not going to follow this procedure. I'm not going to escalate this concern. Okay, so if it's all about human decisions, we have to ask the next obvious question, right? Why? Why are people making these bad decisions? And that's what takes us even deeper. We're moving from the mechanics of how this happened to the culture of why it was allowed to happen. And here's a really powerful way to think about it. The gaps in a company's culture, they are so much more dangerous than any gap in its technical controls. Because a weak culture, it will always find a way to break even the strongest system. And that leads us to the first huge cultural failure, creating a place where silence is rewarded more than speaking up. It's that kind of culture where people see something, they know it doesn't look right, but they just stay quiet. Maybe they're afraid of the fallout, or maybe they just don't care. And what happens in that silence? The problem just festers and grows, completely unchecked. The second big cultural failure is when personal comfort gets prioritized over professional responsibility. I mean, think about it, right? It's always easier to just approve something and avoid a difficult chat than it is to challenge a colleague or, worse, your boss. And that preference for the easy path, for comfort over confrontation, that's exactly where fraud gets the oxygen it needs to survive. So when we put all these pieces together, what's the final verdict here? In a case like this, what was the real failure?
Well, the real failure here, it's not technological at all. It really boils down to 4 human breakdowns. First, just weak enforcement of the rules that are already there. Second, a total lack of independent challenge. Nobody feels like they can actually ask why. Third, no continuous vigilant monitoring. And maybe the biggest one of all, just relying way too much on trust when what you really needed was rigorous verification. And, this leads to a super critical question that every organization out there should be asking itself. Are you actually strengthening your controls and your culture? Or are you just getting better at creating a paper trail that looks like you are? Because there's a world of difference between having a process on paper and actually having a process in practice.
And that right there, that's really the key takeaway from all this. A fraud of this size, it's never just a sudden lightning strike out of a clear blue sky. No, it's the final, catastrophic collapse of a building that has been showing cracks for a long, long time. It's the end result of multiple signals, multiple warnings, and multiple red flags that were, one by one, just ignored.